It was a cold December morning in Manhattan, New York. The winter of 2023 had arrived in full force, bringing cutting winds that made New Yorkers shrink deeper into their expensive coats as they hurried along the icy sidewalks. Christmas lights already decorated Fifth Avenue in majestic fashion, casting a golden glow that reflected off the windows of luxury stores. But for many, all that magnificence wasn't enough to warm hearts wounded by the harshness of life. James Mitchell, at 42, was an imposing figure in the financial world of Wall Street. Tall, with perfectly groomed gray hair and always dressed in tailored Italian suits, he had built a financial empire that placed him among the most respected and feared investors of his generation. His company, Mitchell and Associates Financial Consulting, occupied 3 entire floors of a skyscraper in the financial district and was valued at over $50 million. James had everything money in America could buy: a luxurious 4,000-square-foot penthouse on the Upper East Side, with panoramic views of Central Park, a collection of European sports cars stored in a climate-controlled garage, clothes from the most renowned Italian and French designers, and VIP access to the most exclusive and coveted restaurants in Manhattan. His vacations were spent in private Caribbean resorts or at his summer home in the Hamptons. But behind all that display and professional success, there was something his millions could never fill: a deep, persistent emptiness in his heart. A loneliness that had followed him ever since he decided, while still young, that emotions were obstacles on the path to success. James had grown up in Detroit, the son of a factory worker and a seamstress. From a young age, he promised himself he would never be poor like his parents. He worked tirelessly, earned a scholarship to Harvard, and gradually became the cold, calculating man he was today. In the process, he sacrificed relationships, true friendships, and even the chance to start a family. That specific Tuesday morning, December 12th, James walked with his usual determined stride down Madison Avenue, heading toward his office. He wore his favorite gray Armani suit, a navy blue silk tie, and a black cashmere overcoat that had cost more than many people made in a month. His iPhone 15 Pro buzzed endlessly in his pocket. Millionaire clients, international business partners, stockbrokers, all wanting a piece of his valuable time and financial expertise. As always, James was mentally focused only on numbers, spreadsheets, investments, quarterly profits, and the next big opportunity to multiply fortunes. His mind worked like a human calculator, constantly processing data, analyzing risks, and calculating returns on investments. The morning rush in Manhattan was at its usual frantic pace. Executives in suits rushed to catch yellow cabs. Tourists snapped selfies in front of iconic buildings. Street vendors prepared their hot dog carts. And the constant noise of honking horns, sirens, and chatter created the urban symphony of the city that never sleeps. That was exactly when James was checking his emails while walking that he saw her. Sitting on the cold, imposing steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral, that majestic neo-Gothic landmark rising as a spiritual refuge in the middle of urban chaos, was a girl of about 8 years old, silently crying. Tears streamed down her small, pale face, leaving shiny trails that contrasted with the dirt on her delicate skin. The child wore clothes that had clearly seen better days: a faded pink jacket torn at the right sleeve, patched jeans with clumsy repairs at the knees, and once white sneakers now dirty and full of holes on the sides. Her blonde hair, probably once beautiful and well-kept, was messy and tangled by the relentless December wind. She clutched desperately to an old rag doll, clearly well-loved. The doll had yellow yarn hair, a worn-out blue dress, and one arm nearly falling off, held together only by a few stubborn threads. It was obvious that doll was her only treasure in the world, her only companion and comfort in the midst of abandonment. James stopped abruptly in the middle of the busy sidewalk, causing a small stir among the pedestrians behind him. For an inexplicable moment, something deep inside his chest stirred, a strange, unsettling feeling he had buried and suffocated more than 2 decades earlier, since he had consciously decided that emotions were a dangerous luxury ambitious businessmen couldn't afford. Around the girl, New York life continued its relentless rhythm. Hundreds of people passed her every minute as if she were completely invisible. Executives on phone calls, mothers pushing strollers, college students with heavy backpacks, tourists checking maps on their phones. New York was full of people in vulnerable situations, and most residents had developed as a psychological defense mechanism, a kind of selective blindness to avoid becoming emotionally involved in the countless social problems they encountered daily. But James Yen, for the first time in many years, couldn't just keep walking. His eyes remained fixed on that small, lonely figure, and something inside him began to break through the barriers he had so carefully built over the years. He instinctively looked down at his gold Rolex Submariner. It was 8:47 a.m., and he was already 15 minutes late for a crucial meeting with Japanese investors that could bring his company a $20 million contract. His rational, business-trained mind screamed at him to keep moving immediately, to avoid getting involved in situations that weren't his responsibility, to think only of his business and his professional reputation. But at that moment, for the first time in decades, something stronger and more primal spoke louder than his calculating rationality. James slipped the iPhone into the inside pocket of his overcoat, completely ignoring the insistent calls that kept coming in. For the first time in over 15 years of his career, he consciously chose to put something above business. He crossed Madison Avenue with determined steps, weaving through impatient honking yellow cabs caught in the morning traffic, and walked toward the steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral. As he got closer, he could see more clearly the details that made the scene even more heartbreaking. The little girl wasn't just crying. She was visibly shivering from the cold. Her lips had a worrisome bluish tint, and she tried to shield herself from the freezing wind by pressing against the stone columns of the majestic cathedral. Beside her was a worn pink school backpack with faded unicorn designs. "Hi," James said, slowly crouching down to meet the child's eyes. His voice came out softer and gentler than it usually was, revealing a side of his personality he had long forgotten existed. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" The girl lifted her face, revealing the saddest, most beautiful eyes James had ever seen in his life. They were blue like the Atlantic Ocean on a clear day, but now clouded with unshed tears and a deep pain no child should ever have to carry. She looked at him with the natural distrust of someone who had already learned far too early that the world could be a dangerous and cruel place. She didn't answer right away, only hugged her rag doll tighter, as if that worn-out toy were the only thing keeping her connected to any sense of safety or normalcy. James felt his heart, hardened by years of ruthless negotiations and purely rational decisions, tighten in a way he hadn't experienced since childhood. Without fully understanding why, he took off his expensive cashmere overcoat and gently wrapped it around the girl's trembling shoulders. "What's your name?" James asked, sitting down on the cold step beside her, completely ignoring the fact that his $3,000 Italian suit was now in direct contact with the dirty, freezing concrete. The girl hesitated for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to decide whether she could trust this well-dressed stranger. Finally, with a small, hoarse voice from so much crying, she whispered, "Emma Rose Thompson." "Emma Rose," James repeated, and there was something genuinely warm in the way he said her name. "That's a very beautiful name. I'm James." He paused, realizing that for the first time in years, he wasn't introducing himself with his professional titles or financial credentials. "Where are your parents, Emma?" The girl's face twisted in pain, and new tears slid down her cheeks, already reddened by the cold. Mommy's in heaven now," she said, clutching the doll even tighter. "And Daddy?" "Daddy said he couldn't take care of me anymore. He took me to a place with other kids, but I ran away." James felt like he had been punched in the stomach. The reality of the situation began to take shape in his mind. Emma had run away from an orphanage or foster home and had been living on the streets of Manhattan for who knew how long. "How long have you been here, Emma?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the growing concern. "I don't know," she sniffled. "Many days. Many nights. I come here because the lady from the church sometimes gives me bread." James looked at the school backpack beside her. "Can I see what you have in there?" Emma hesitated again, but something in his gentle expression reassured her. She opened the backpack, revealing its meager contents. A few neatly folded clothes despite the circumstances. A school notebook filled with childish drawings, broken colored pencils, a small crumpled photo, and a half-rotten apple that was probably her only food. James carefully picked up the photograph. It showed Emma, visibly younger and much happier, standing beside a beautiful blonde woman who was clearly her mother. Both were smiling brightly at the camera, and Emma was holding the same rag doll she now clutched to her chest. "Is this your mom?" James asked softly. Emma nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mommy made Sophie for me," she said, lifting the doll. "She said Sophie would always take care of me when she couldn't be around." In that moment, James Mitchell, the man who had built a financial empire on pure logic and calculated decisions, felt something inside him completely shatter. His carefully structured life, all his meticulous plans, all his established priorities suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the vulnerability of this lonely little girl. He looked around the cathedral, noticing the pedestrians who kept walking by without paying any attention to what was happening. Some tourists were snapping photos of the Gothic architecture. Couples strolled hand in hand. Executives talked on their phones about meetings and contracts. The world kept spinning, indifferent to the suffering of an 8-year-old girl who had nowhere to go. James made a decision he couldn't even explain rationally. It wasn't based on cost-benefit analyses or investment return projections. It came from a part of his soul he had locked away so long ago that he had almost forgotten it was there. "Emma," he said, looking straight into her blue eyes, "would you like to come with me? I can give you a safe place to stay, warm food, and, well, we can figure out together how to help you." Emma looked at him with an expression that mixed hope and fear. "You won't send me away like Daddy did?" James felt his heart break even more. "No," he said, and there was absolute conviction in his voice. "I promise I won't send you away." For a long moment, Emma studied his face, her young eyes trying to read the intentions of this strange man who had appeared in her life like an answer to the prayers she whispered every night, before falling asleep on the cold cathedral steps. Finally, she slowly nodded. James stood up and held out his hand to her. Emma hesitated only for a second before placing her small, frozen hand in his large, warm one. In that moment, on the steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral in the heart of Manhattan, two lives intertwined in a way that would forever change the destiny of both. The first challenge came even before they left the front of the cathedral. James looked at Emma, still wrapped in his expensive overcoat, and realized he had absolutely no experience with children. His life had been so focused on business that he had never once had to think about the basic needs of an 8-year-old. "Emma," he said, crouching down again, "are you hungry?" Her eyes lit up for the first time since they'd met, and she nodded shyly. James glanced around Madison Avenue, searching for a suitable spot. His eyes landed on a small family cafe called Rosie's Diner, a modest place that stood in sharp contrast to the upscale restaurants he usually visited. "How about we get some breakfast?" he suggested, extending his hand to her again. As they walked down the sidewalk, James noticed how Emma gazed in wonder at everything around her. The sparkling store windows, the luxury cars, the skyscrapers that seemed to touch the clouds. For her, after days spent living on the streets, this part of Manhattan was like stepping into an entirely different world. At Rosie's Diner, the waitress, a middle-aged Latina woman named Maria, looked curiously at the unusual pair. A clearly wealthy man in an expensive suit, and a little girl obviously in a vulnerable situation. But there was something about the gentle way James treated Emma that made Maria smile as she led them to a more private corner booth. "What would you like to eat, sweetheart?" James asked, watching Emma study the menu with wide eyes. "Can I choose anything?" she asked, almost in disbelief. "Anything," James confirmed, and he felt a tightening in his chest as he realized it had probably been a very long time since Emma had been given the simple freedom to choose what to eat. Emma ordered pancakes with strawberry syrup, scrambled eggs, bacon, and hot chocolate with whipped cream. James ordered only a black coffee, but spent most of the time watching the little girl eat with an appetite that revealed days of deprivation. "Emma," he said carefully, while she savored the pancakes, "do you remember the name of the place you ran away from?" Emma stopped eating, and her face tightened slightly. "It was a big place, with lots of kids. The lady who took care of us she wasn't very nice. She yelled a lot." James made a mental note to investigate later. For now, his priority was making sure Emma felt safe. After breakfast, they took a cab to the Upper East Side. Emma had never been in a building as tall as James's, and her eyes widened when the uniformed doorman greeted him respectfully. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," said the doorman, whose name was Robert. He looked curiously at Emma but was too discreet to ask questions. The elevator carried them up to the 30th floor, and Emma pressed her face against the glass wall, watching the city shrink below her. When James opened the door to his penthouse, Emma literally gasped. The apartment was bigger than anywhere she had ever lived. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular panoramic view of Central Park. The furniture was elegant and expensive, and the artwork on the walls was worth more than most people earned in years. "This is your home?" Emma asked, her small voice echoing in the vast living room. "Yes," James replied, "and now it's yours too." Emma walked slowly through the apartment, carefully touching the furniture as if she were afraid to break something. She stopped in front of a large window overlooking Central Park. "Look, Sophie," she said to her doll. "We can see the trees from up here." James watched her, realizing that despite all the luxury around her, Emma still clutched her worn-out doll tightly. That simple toy was clearly more valuable to her than anything he owned. "Emma," he said, "would you like to take a hot bath and put on some clean clothes?" Her eyes lit up again. A hot bath. James led her to the guest bathroom, which was bigger than many entire bedrooms. The marble tub looked like a small pool to Emma, and she laughed, the first joyful sound James had heard from her, when he showed her how the golden faucets worked. While Emma bathed, with Sophie carefully placed on a nearby chair to watch over her, James realized a practical problem. Emma had no proper clothes. He called Margaret Chen, his highly efficient personal assistant. "Margaret," he said, "I need you to cancel all my meetings today and take care of something a little unusual." "Of course, Mr. Mitchell. What do you need?" "I need you to go to Bloomingdale's and buy a complete wardrobe for an 8-year-old girl. She's small for her age." "And Margaret?" "Buy toys, children's books, everything a girl her age might need." There was a surprised silence on the other end. Margaret had worked for James for 5 years and had never received a request even remotely like this. "Mr. Mitchell," she said carefully, "may I ask?" "It's a long story, Margaret. Just trust me on this one, of course." "What style of clothes?" James glanced toward the bathroom, where he could hear Emma happily chatting with Sophie. "Clothes a normal 8-year-old girl would like to wear. Nothing too formal." "And Margaret?" "Add a few dresses, too, with unicorns, if you can find them." When Emma came out of the bath, wrapped in a fluffy bathrobe that was far too big for her, James had to improvise with his own clothes. She wore one of his white t-shirts, which looked like a dress on her and he used a belt to adjust the size. "Now I look like a ghost." Emma laughed, looking at herself in the mirror. It was the first time James had heard her laugh, and the sound was like music to his ears. They spent the afternoon waiting for Margaret to return with the shopping. Emma explored the apartment cautiously, always keeping Sophie close. She was fascinated by the giant TV, bigger than any she had ever seen, the modern kitchen filled with appliances that looked like something out of a sci-fi movie, and especially James's library. Though she admitted shyly that she was still learning to read harder words. When Margaret finally arrived with several bags from Bloomingdale's, FAO, Schwartz and Barnes & Noble, Emma thought it was Christmas. There were colorful dresses, jeans that actually fit, tops with animal designs, brand new sneakers, and even a giant plush unicorn that she immediately introduced to Sophie as a new friend. But it was when James showed her the guest bedroom, that would now be her room, that Emma finally cried. Not out of sadness but out of relief and gratitude. "This room is just mine," she asked in disbelief. "Just yours," James confirmed. Emma sat on the soft bed, hugging Sophie and the new unicorn, and looked at James with pure admiration. "Thank you," she said simply, but there was a world of emotion in that word. At that moment, James knew he had made the most important decision of his life. The first night was harder than James had imagined. Around 2 a.m, he was woken by screams coming from Emma's room. When he rushed in, he found the girl sitting up in bed, trembling and crying, clearly caught in the middle of a nightmare. Emma, you're safe," he said, gently turning on the light and sitting on the edge of the bed. She looked at him with wide, terrified eyes, still not fully awake. "Mommy, where's my mommy?" James's heart sank. "It's me, James. You're in my apartment, remember?" "You're safe here." Emma gradually came to hugging Sophie tightly against her chest. "I dreamed Mommy was calling me, but I couldn't find her." James didn't really know what to do. He had almost no experience with offering emotional comfort. But something instinctive made him open his arms, and Emma threw herself against him, searching for the kind of comfort only a warm hug could bring. "It's okay," he murmured, stroking her blonde hair. "You're not alone anymore." They stayed like that for almost an hour, until Emma finally drifted back to sleep. James remained by her bedside even longer, watching the girl's steady breathing and wondering what he had gotten himself into. The next morning, reality came knocking, literally. James was making breakfast, a skill he was having to improvise quickly, when the doorbell rang. Through the intercom, Robert announced that 2 Child Protective Services officers wanted to speak with him. "Mr. Mitchell," said Officer Amanda Rodriguez, a Latina woman in her early 40s with a serious but not unfriendly expression. "We received a report that a missing child may be here in this apartment." Beside her stood Officer Tom Bradley, a tall, thin man taking notes on a small pad. James felt his stomach tighten. "Please, come in." Emma was in the kitchen, wearing one of her new dresses, a blue one with tiny white flowers, and eating cereal. When she saw the officers, she instinctively hid behind James. "Hello, sweetheart," Amanda said kindly. "Are you Emma Rose Thompson?" Emma nodded shyly, clutching James's shirt. "Emma ran away from Harrison Children's Center 4 days ago," Amanda explained to James. "We've been looking for her." "I don't want to go back there," Emma blurted out suddenly, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "Mrs. Williams was mean to me. She said I was a problem because I cried for Mommy." James felt anger rising inside him. What exactly was happening in that place? Tom Bradley glanced at his notes. "Harrison Center is a licensed facility, Mr. Mitchell, although there have been some complaints about strict disciplinary methods." "Complaints?" James raised an eyebrow. "What kind of complaints?" Amanda stepped in diplomatically. "Mr. Mitchell, we understand your intentions are good, but Emma needs to be under official care while we process her legal situation." "And what exactly is her legal situation?" James asked, placing a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. "Emma's father, Derek Thompson, signed papers relinquishing custody a week ago," Tom explained. "Emma is officially a ward of the state until we find a suitable adoptive family." "I want to stay with James," Emma said, her small voice firm with determination. He's nice to me. He lets me keep Sophie and bought me new clothes. James looked at the officers. What would it take for me to become her legal temporary guardian? Amanda and Tom exchanged glances. Mr. Mitchell, Amanda said carefully, the process of becoming a foster parent or adoptive family is extensive. There are background checks, psychological evaluations, home inspections, mandatory training. How long would that take? Months. Maybe a year, depending on circumstances. James felt Emma press closer against him. And in the meantime, Emma would have to return to the foster system. No, Emma cried, bursting into tears. Please, James, don't let them take me. At that moment, James made another decision that would change everything. Officers, would you give me a moment to make some calls? I'd like to hire a family law attorney. An hour later, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, one of the most respected family law attorneys in New York, was sitting in James's living room. A sharp-minded 50-year-old woman with elegantly styled gray hair, she was known for being both compassionate and formidable in court. James Z., she said after hearing the whole story, what you're proposing is legally complicated but not impossible. I can file for emergency temporary custody, arguing that removing Emma from the stable environment you've provided would be harmful to her psychological well-being. Would that work? Maybe. You'd have to commit immediately to the full process of becoming a foster parent. And James, she paused, meeting his eyes seriously. This would completely change your life. Are you sure you're ready for that? James glanced at Emma, who was quietly playing on the floor with Sophie and her new unicorn, clearly trying not to listen to the adults discussing her future. Dr. Martinez, he said, 2 days ago, if someone had told me I'd be considering adopting a child, I would have thought they'd lost their mind. But looking at Emma now, I can't imagine sending her back into a system that's clearly failed her. Rebecca smiled for the first time since arriving. Then let's fight. The next few hours were a whirlwind of phone calls, paperwork, and negotiations. Rebecca worked her contacts in the court system, while James canceled major meetings and had tense conversations with his partners, who couldn't understand his sudden change in priorities. James, what's going on with you? Asked his senior partner, David Chen, during a strained call. You missed the meeting with the Japanese, canceled lunch with the Peterson group, and now Margaret tells me you're adopting a kid. It's complicated, David. Complicated? James, your entire career has been built on being the guy who never lets anything distract him. And now you're telling me a girl you met yesterday is more important than a $20 million deal. James looked over at Emma, who had fallen asleep on the couch clutching Sophie, finally looking at peace for the first time since he'd met her. Yes, David, that's exactly what I'm saying. By the end of the day, Rebecca had secured an emergency hearing for the next morning. James, she said, gathering her papers, the judge will want to see that you have not only the financial resources but also the emotional stability and genuine commitment to raise a child. He's going to question your motives, your lack of experience, your single lifestyle. And if I don't get custody? Rebecca glanced at Emma sleeping. Then she goes back into the system tomorrow afternoon. That night, James stayed awake for hours, staring out the window at the Manhattan skyline and wondering if he'd made the right choice. His entire life had been built on control, predictability, and measurable success. Now, all of it was being tested by an 8-year-old girl with a rag doll and a traumatic past. But when Emma woke up again with nightmares at 3 a.m, and he comforted her until she fell back asleep, James knew with absolute certainty that there was no other path forward. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and cold in Manhattan. James woke at 5 a.m. after only 3 hours of restless sleep. He found Emma already awake in her room, sitting by the window looking out at Central Park, clutching Sophie. Did you sleep well? He asked, though the redness in her eyes told him the answer. I was scared, Emma admitted. What if the judge says I have to leave? James sat down beside her on the edge of the bed. Emma, No matter what happens today, I want you to know that these past 3 days with you have been the best of my life." She looked at him with those deep blue eyes. "Mine too. You're the first grown-up who lets me be a kid again." That simple statement hit James like a punch to the gut. He realized Emma had been forced to grow up far too quickly, to be far too strong for an 8-year-old girl. They had breakfast in relative silence. James had hired a temporary nanny, Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, a 60-year-old Englishwoman with decades of experience caring for children, to stay with Emma in case the hearing dragged on. "Remember, dear," said Mrs. Patterson in her soothing British accent, "no matter what happens, you are a very brave and special little girl." The New York County Family Court was housed in a grand stone building in Lower Manhattan. James had been in many courtrooms before, but always for corporate matters. This time, it felt like his very soul was on trial. Rebecca Martinez met him on the courthouse steps, carrying a thick folder of documents. "James, I managed to get some important information about Harrison Center. It looks like there's an ongoing investigation into inadequate care practices." "Does that help us?" "It might. But Judge Franklin, who's presiding over our hearing, is known for being tough on unconventional adoptions. He'll want absolute certainty that your motives are genuine." The courtroom was intimidating. Dark wooden walls, stiff benches, and an atmosphere of seriousness that made every word echo. Judge Harold Franklin, 65, darned with white hair and an expression that carried decades of difficult decisions about families and children, took his seat. "Your Honor," Rebecca began, "my client, Mr. James Mitchell, is requesting emergency temporary custody of 8-year-old Emma Rose Thompson, with the intent to immediately begin the formal adoption process." Across the room, State Prosecutor Sarah Chen stood. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge Mr. Mitchell's good intentions, this is a highly irregular situation. Mr. Mitchell has no prior experience with children, he is single, and he has known the minor for only 3 days. Judge Franklin looked over his glasses at James. "Mr. Mitchell, can you explain to this court what motivated you to take such a drastic step?" James stood, feeling the weight of the moment. "Your Honor, 3 days ago I was a man who believed success was measured only in dollars and contracts. I had built a life that looked perfect on paper but was completely empty inside." He paused, glancing at the table where Emma sat with a social worker. She held Sophie and looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. "When I saw Emma crying on the steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral, something inside me woke up. It wasn't pity or charity. It was recognition. I saw in her a soul that, like mine, had been wounded by life but still held on to hope." The prosecutor rose. "Your Honor, noble feelings don't automatically qualify someone to be a parent. Mr. Mitchell works 70 hours a week, travels constantly, and his entire life revolves around corporate commitments." "It used to," James corrected. "In the past 3 days, I've canceled meetings worth millions of dollars. I've delayed negotiations my partners considered critical. And, Your Honor, I would do it again, every day without hesitation." Judge Franklin made a note. "Mr. Mitchell, raising a child, especially one who has suffered trauma, is not a decision you can walk away from when it becomes inconvenient. How can I be sure you won't change your mind once the novelty fades?" James took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I can present the following facts. In 3 days, I've already started modifying my apartment to create a child-friendly environment. I hired Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, a licensed caregiver, to assist while I learn. I've spoken with my partners about restructuring my workload." Rebecca stood. "Your Honor, I would also like to submit this preliminary report on the conditions at Harrison Children's Center, the facility Emma ran away from." The judge reviewed the document, his expression growing more serious. "These are troubling reports." The prosecutor tried to downplay it. "Your Honor, even if one facility has issues, there are other options in the system." "No!" Emma's voice cut through the courtroom like a desperate cry. Everyone turned to look at her. Please don't send me to another place like that. Judge Franklin looked at the child with a softer expression. Emma, would you come up here and tell me how you feel? Emma looked at James, who gave her an encouraging nod. She walked up to the front, hugging Sophie, her small legs barely reaching the floor of the witness chair. How do you feel about staying with Mr. Mitchell? The judge asked gently. He makes me feel safe, Emma said, her voice clear despite her nerves. He doesn't yell at me when I cry for Mommy. He lets Sophie sleep with me. And he promised he won't send me away. And what do you feel about Mr. Mitchell as a person? Emma looked straight at James. He was sad too, like me. But now we're both not so sad anymore. The judge paused for a long time, clearly weighing everything. Mr. Mitchell, if I grant temporary custody, do you understand that you will be monitored closely? There will be unannounced visits, regular reports, and any sign of inadequacy will mean Emma's immediate removal. I fully understand, Your Honor. And are you prepared to begin immediately with parenting classes, family counseling, and all requirements of the adoption process? I am. Judge Franklin looked again at Emma, then at James, then at the documentation before him. The room was utterly silent. This court recognizes that exceptional circumstances sometimes require exceptional decisions. While Mr. Mitchell's situation is irregular, I also recognize that a child who ran away from a care facility was not receiving what she needed. James held his breath. Therefore, this court grants emergency temporary custody of Emma Rose Thompson to Mr. James Mitchell, valid for 6 months, during which he must complete all requirements for formal adoption. This decision will be reviewed monthly. Emma let out a joyful cry and ran to James, who lifted her into his arms and spun her around, both of them crying with relief and happiness. Rebecca smiled broadly and whispered, "We did it." But James knew this was only the first victory. The real journey of becoming a father and helping Emma heal was just beginning. As they left the courthouse, Emma clutched his hand tightly. James, she said, "Are you really my dad now?" "Not officially yet," he replied, "but in my heart, yes. You're my daughter." And in that moment, James Mitchell finally understood what it meant to have something in life worth more than all the money in the world. The first 2 weeks after the hearing were an emotional roller coaster that tested James's limits in every way. Having legal custody of Emma was one thing. Learning how to actually be a father was something entirely different. The first big crisis came on a Tuesday morning. James woke up at 6 hours as he always did, and went to check on Emma. Her room was empty, the bed made with the kind of military precision she had learned at the group home. His heart raced. "Emma, Emma?" he shouted, running through the apartment. He found her in the kitchen, already dressed for school, trying to make breakfast for both of them. There was flour scattered across the floor, broken eggs on the counter, and Emma was silently crying as she tried to clean up the mess. "I wanted to make breakfast for you," she sobbed, "like Mommy used to make for Daddy, but I ruined everything." James knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around her. "Emma, sweetheart, you don't have to take care of me. I'm the one who's supposed to take care of you. But what if you decide I'm too much work?" she asked, echoing fears that went deep. "What if you send me away like Daddy did?" In that moment, James realized that gaining custody was only the first step. Emma had to relearn how to trust, how to be a child, how to believe she could be loved without conditions. "Emma," he said, looking straight into her eyes, "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to always remember it. You will never, ever be a burden to me. You are the best thing that has ever happened in my life." School brought its own unexpected challenges. James enrolled Emma at Riverside Elementary, a respected private school on the Upper East Side. On the first day, he met with the principal, Mrs. Elizabeth Thornton, an elegant woman in her 50s who had run the school for over 2 decades. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, reviewing Emma's file, "I see Emma has a complex history. Loss of her mother, abandonment by her father, time in institutional care. Our teachers will need to be informed on how best to support her. What does that mean exactly? James asked. Children who've been through trauma often struggle with concentration, separation anxiety, or regressive behaviors. Emma may need additional support. As if to prove her point, Emma refused to let go of James's hand when it was time for him to leave. She clung to his leg, whispering, "What if you don't come back? What if you forget me?" Her teacher, Ms. Rachel Garcia, a young Latina with endless patience, knelt beside Emma. "How about we let Sophie sit on your desk today? She can watch over you until your daddy comes back." The word daddy made both Emma and James stop for a moment. It was the first time anyone had called him that, and both of them felt something warm settle in their hearts. But the challenges didn't stop at school. James discovered that his social life was practically non-existent when it came to including a child. His old friends, mostly business acquaintances, didn't know how to handle his new reality. It became clear during a business dinner James thought was too important to cancel. He brought Emma with him to Le Bernardin, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. "James," muttered his client, Richard Westbrook, a British investor, looking uncomfortably at Emma coloring in a book at the table. "I didn't know you had family developments." Emma, sensing the tension, grew quiet and withdrawn. When Richard made a remark about the inconvenience of mixing business with personal life, Emma whispered to James, "Am I causing trouble again?" James looked at his wealthy client, then at Emma, and made an instant decision. "Richard, he said, lifting Emma into his lap. "If having my daughter here is a problem for you, then maybe we're not the right business partners." "James, be reasonable." "I'm being perfectly reasonable. Emma is my priority now. If that's a problem for anyone, then that person doesn't need to be in my life." They left the restaurant, and James took Emma to a nearby pizza place where she could simply be an 8-year-old. "Did you lose a lot of money because of me today?" Emma asked down, biting into her slice. "Emma," James said, "let me explain something about money. I've made a lot of money in my life, but I was never truly rich until I met you." "What do you mean?" "I mean you gave me something money can't buy, a family." Gradually, they began building their own traditions. Every Saturday morning, they made pancakes together. James burned half of them. Emma laughed at his attempts, and Sophie supervised from the high chair. Sundays were for Central Park, where Emma discovered the playground and James discovered the simple joy of pushing someone on a swing. One night, while helping Emma with her math homework, James realized just how smart she was. Not just clever, but truly bright, with a problem-solving ability that impressed him. "Emma," he asked, "have you ever thought about what you want to be when you grow up?" She paused, chewing on the end of her pencil. "I want to help other kids like me, kids who lost their mommies." "How?" "Maybe I could be a doctor. Or maybe I could have a big house where sad kids could stay until they find families that really love them." James felt his heart swell with pride. At 8 years old, Emma already showed a compassion and maturity many adults never reached. But not everything was easy. Emma still had frequent nightmares, bouts of anxiety when James came home late, and occasional emotional outbursts when she felt overwhelmed. James learned to recognize the signs. When she got too quiet, when she hugged Sophie tighter than usual, when she started obsessively tidying her room. During one of these crises, when Emma was inconsolable after a particularly intense nightmare, James felt completely lost. He called Mrs. Patterson in the middle of the night. "James, dear," the experienced caregiver said, "being a parent doesn't mean having all the answers. It means being there when no answers exist." That simple wisdom changed James's perspective. He stopped trying to fix Emma and started simply being present for her. When she cried, he held her hand. When she had nightmares, he sat by her bed until she fell back asleep. When she felt overwhelmed, he created Sophie time, special moments where she could talk to her doll about her feelings. 1 month after the hearing, Emma did something that surprised everyone. During dinner, she looked at James and said, "James?" "Yes, sweetheart? Can I call you Daddy?" "For real." James felt tears well up in his eyes. "Nothing in the world would make me happier." Then, "Daddy?" "Yes, Emma. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for letting me find you." That night, for the first time since they met, Emma slept through the night without nightmares. And James finally understood that family wasn't something you were born into. It was something you chose to build. With patience, love, and the courage to open your heart to someone who needed you just as much as you needed them. 3 months had passed since James and Emma had officially become father and daughter. Spring had arrived in New York with its promise of renewal, and with it came a stability neither of them had ever known before. James had learned to read Emma's subtle signals, when she needed space, when she needed affection, when she was processing hard memories. Emma, in turn, had begun to trust that James really would stay no matter how difficult the days became. The big shift came one April morning, when Emma came downstairs for breakfast with a determined look on her face. "Daddy," she said, using the word that now flowed naturally, "I want to meet other kids like me." James paused in the middle of scrambling eggs. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Kids who don't have mommies and daddies, or who have new mommies and daddies like I have you." Emma hugged Sophie tightly to her chest. "I thought maybe they need to know it's going to be okay." Emma's emotional maturity never failed to amaze James. At just 8 years old, she already showed a capacity for empathy that many adults never developed. "Do you have a specific idea?" he asked, sitting next to her at the kitchen table. "Maybe we could visit places where kids are waiting for families, and I could bring some of my new toys to share." James felt his heart swell with pride. In less than 4 months, Emma had gone from a traumatized child running away on the streets to a little girl who wanted to help others in the same situation. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he said. "How about we start by looking up organizations that help children in foster care?" The following Saturday, they visited the Sunshine Children's Home, a center very different from the one Emma had once run away from. The director, Mrs. Carmen Rodriguez, welcomed them warmly. "Emma," Mrs. Rodriguez said, kneeling to be at the girl's eye level, "the kids here will love meeting you. Many of them are also waiting to find their forever families." Emma clutched James's hand tightly as they entered the playroom. About 15 children of different ages were playing, reading, or simply sitting in silence. Emma immediately recognized the expression on many of their faces, the same one she herself had worn not long ago. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, was sitting alone in a corner, hugging a worn teddy bear. Emma approached her cautiously. "Hi," Emma said gently. "I'm Emma. What's your name?" "Sophia," the girl whispered, without lifting her eyes. "Sophia is a really pretty name." "This is Sophie," Emma said, showing her doll. "She used to be my only friend, too." Sophia finally looked up, curious. "Used to be?" "Yes, now I have a daddy who loves me very much." "He's right over there," Emma pointed at James, who was speaking with Mrs. Rodriguez. "And he told me that when you really love someone, you always have room for more love." Throughout the afternoon, Emma moved among the children, sharing toys, listening to their stories, and simply being a comforting presence. James watched with growing admiration, seeing how she instinctively knew what each child needed to hear. To a 7-year-old boy named Marcus Quars, who was angry at the world, Emma said, "I was really mad too when my mommy went to heaven. It's normal to be mad when bad things happen." To a 13-year-old named Jasmine, who insisted she didn't need a family, Emma simply sat quietly beside her, showing that sometimes presence was more powerful than words. On the way home, Emma was quiet, processing everything she had experienced. "How do you feel?" James asked. "Sad for the kids," she said honestly, "but also happy, because now I know how to help." "Daddy, can we go back next week?" "Of course we can." That visit became a weekly ritual. Emma began bringing books that James read to the younger kids, art supplies for creative activities, and always her warm, understanding presence. The children began to look forward to her visits, and Mrs. Rodriguez noted that the atmosphere in the home had improved noticeably. "Emma has a special gift," she told James one afternoon. "She reaches children our staff struggles to connect with." But perhaps the biggest change came from James himself. Watching the impact Emma had on the other children, he began questioning how he could use his resources more meaningfully. One night after Emma was asleep, James called Rebecca Martinez. "Rebecca," he said, "I want to establish a foundation, specifically to improve conditions in foster centers and help make adoptions easier." "James, that's a big decision. Are you sure?" "More sure than I've ever been about anything. Emma showed me that there's a whole world of children who need what I can provide. Not necessarily a home, though some may need that too, but resources, advocacy, opportunities." 2 weeks later, Emma's Hope Foundation was officially launched with an initial donation of $10 million from James. Its mission was twofold: to improve conditions in foster centers and to create programs connecting children with potential adoptive families. Emma was overjoyed when James told her about the foundation named after her. "It's to help more kids like me?" she asked, her eyes shining. "Exactly. You inspired me to realize we have a responsibility to help when we can." "Can I help decide how the money is used?" James laughed. "Of course you can. You probably understand better than I do what those kids really need." The foundation's first initiative was a complete renovation of the center Emma had once fled. When James and Emma visited after the renovations, the difference was dramatic. The walls were now colorful and welcoming. There was a library filled with books, a spacious playroom, and most importantly, a new staff trained specifically in trauma-informed care. "Do you remember how it used to be here?" James asked as they walked the newly painted halls. Emma nodded, holding his hand tighter. "It was dark and sad. Now it feels like a place where kids can be happy while they wait for their families." That night, Emma did something that became another tradition. She wrote a letter to her late mother. "Dear Mommy," she wrote in her careful child's handwriting, "today I helped other kids who are sad like I was. Daddy James says you'd be proud of me. I think you sent him to find me. Thank you for making me strong enough to help other people. Love you forever, Emma." James found the letter on the kitchen table the next morning and had to sit down for a moment, feeling the weight of both the responsibility and the privilege of being this extraordinary child's father. When Emma came down for breakfast, he hugged her extra tightly. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked. "I'm more than okay," he said. "I'm grateful to have a daughter who teaches me every day what really matters in life." Emma smiled and poured herself some cereal. "You teach me too, Daddy. You taught me that families can be chosen and that love can heal almost anything." "Almost anything?" "Well," she said thoughtfully, "I still miss Mommy, but now I know that missing her doesn't mean I'm alone." In that moment, James knew they weren't just building a family. They were creating a legacy of hope that would stretch far beyond their own lives. 6 months. That's exactly how long James and Emma had been father and daughter, when everything they had built together was suddenly put at risk by a phone call that would change their lives forever. It was a Friday in September. Emma was at school, and James was working from his home office when the phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but something, maybe a gut feeling, maybe simple curiosity, made him answer. "James Mitchell." "Mr. Mitchell?" "This is Derek Thompson." James's blood ran cold. Derek Thompson, Emma's biological father, the man who had abandoned his own daughter and vanished from her life. "What do you want?" James's voice came out colder than ice. "I want my daughter back." The 4 words hit James like bullets. His world, so carefully rebuilt with Emma, instantly began to crumble. "You gave up any right to Emma when you signed away custody," James said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've changed my mind. I heard she's living with a millionaire now." I imagine she's getting a fancy education, designer clothes, everything I could never give her. This has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with money. Derek cut in, his voice bitter. I was broke, desperate, and yes, I made a terrible decision. But now I'm back on track. I have a steady job, a decent apartment. I want my daughter. James sank heavily into his chair, his heart pounding so loudly he could hear it. Derek and Emma's happy here. She's healed from the trauma. She has friends, a school she loves, stability, and she has a real father who can take care of her now. The call ended, leaving James staring at the phone as if it had just exploded in his hands. His fingers shook as he dialed Rebecca Martinez. Rebecca? It's an emergency. Derek Thompson is back. 2 hours later, Rebecca sat in James's living room, her grave expression saying everything he feared. Jamesing legally, and this is complicated. Derek never fully lost his parental rights. He signed temporary relinquishment, but with good legal representation, he could argue he was under extreme stress when he made that decision. But Emma, she can't go back to him. You didn't see her when I found her. I know, but the courts strongly favor reuniting biological families when possible. If Derek can prove financial stability and emotional readiness. James raked his hands through his hair, feeling desperate. What can we do? We fight. But James, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that... No. James shot to his feet. I'm not even considering that possibility. Emma is my daughter. She belongs here. When Emma got home from school that afternoon, James had to do the hardest thing he'd ever done. Tell her Derek had returned. Emma was in the middle of telling him about her day when James gently interrupted. Emma, sweetheart, we need to talk about something important. Something in his tone made her stop instantly. She hugged Sophie tighter, that old reflex whenever she sensed trouble. What is it, Daddy? James knelt in front of her, taking her little hands in his. Emma, Derek called today. Her face went pale. My biological dad? Yes, he wants you to go live with him again. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma looked at James with those ocean blue eyes, now filled with confusion and fear that broke his heart. Do I have to? She whispered, her voice trembling. Not if I can help it, James said firmly. But Emma, you need to know we'll have to go through some legal processes. Some people will ask questions, and it might be hard. Emma threw herself into James's arms, clinging to him with desperate strength. I don't want to go. I want to stay with you. You're my real daddy. Tears burned James's eyes. And you're my real daughter. We'll fight for this, okay? I won't let anyone take you. But even as he made the promise, James knew it might not be one he could keep. The first hearing was set for 2 weeks later. In those 14 days, James watched Emma regress in heartbreaking ways. The nightmares returned every night. She stopped eating properly. At school, her teachers reported she was distracted and anxious. One night, James found her sitting at her bedroom window at 3 a.m, staring out at Central Park. Can't sleep? He asked, sitting beside her. Daddy? Emma said softly in the dark. What if he takes me away and I never see you again? James pulled her into his lap, holding her close. Emma, no matter what happens, and you'll always be my daughter. Nothing can change that. But what if I forget you? What if I forget what it's like living here? You won't forget. And I won't let you forget. I promise. The night before the hearing, something extraordinary happened. Emma, who had been withdrawn and quiet for days, suddenly stood up from the dinner table with a determination James hadn't seen in weeks. Daddy, she said, I want to talk to the judge. What? I want to talk to the judge and tell him why I want to stay with you. James looked at this brave 8-year-old girl, willing to fight for the family they had built together. Emma, are you sure? It could be scary. I'm scared, she admitted, but not as scared as I am of losing you. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Derek Thompson was there, a 40-year-old man with a tired face wearing a cheap but clean suit. He avoided looking at Emma as she entered. Judge Franklin, the same judge who had granted the initial custody, regarded everyone with grave eyes. "This is an extraordinarily difficult case," he began. "We are weighing biological parental rights against the best interest of the child." Derek's lawyer presented his evidence. Derek had a steady job as a mechanic, had rented a 2-bedroom apartment, and had completed a parenting counseling program. Rebecca countered with evidence of Emma's stability and happiness with James, school reports showing her academic and emotional progress, and testimonies from teachers and therapists. But when Emma was called to speak, the courtroom fell into complete silence. "Emma," Judge Franklin said gently, "do you understand why you're here today?" "Yes, sir. My biological dad wants to take me back. And how do you feel about that?" Emma looked at Derek for the first time, then at James, then finally at the judge. Her voice, and when she spoke, was clear and steady. "Your Honor, I love my biological dad because he gave me life, but James gave me hope." The courtroom went still. Even Derek seemed at a loss for words. "Go on, Emma," the judge encouraged. "When Derek left me at the group home, I thought nobody wanted me. But James chose me. He chooses me every day." Emma paused, hugging Sophie tightly, then looked straight at Derek. "Derek, I know you're sorry, and I forgive you, but my family is James now." What happened next was completely unexpected and would change everything. What happened next left the entire courtroom in absolute shock. Derek Thompson slowly rose from his chair, his hands visibly trembling. Everyone expected him to fight Emma's words, to defend his parental rights, to demand his daughter back. Instead, he began to cry. Not quiet tears, deep, desperate sobs of a man who had finally grasped the full weight of what he had done, and of what his daughter had become without him. "Your Honor," Derek said, his voice broken and barely audible. I need to say something." The courtroom went silent. Even Derek's own attorney looked at him in confusion. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Franklin said carefully, "you may speak." Derek looked directly at Emma, who sat clutching Sophie to her chest, her wide blue eyes filled with surprise and confusion. "Emma," Derek said, his voice calmer now but still heavy with emotion, "I heard every word you said, and you're absolutely right." He moved slowly toward her, kneeling down so he was at her eye level, just as James had done that very first day on the cathedral steps. "Daddy Derek?" Emma asked hesitantly, using a name that shocked everyone in the room. Derek froze, clearly moved that she still saw him as a father. "Yes, my little one. Did you really come to take me back?" "I came because I convinced myself that if I fixed my life, I could be the dad you deserved. But seeing you here today, hearing your words about hope and chosen family, I finally understood something important." "What, Daddy Derek?" Derek took a deep breath, glancing between Emma and James. "I realized that a real father isn't the one who fights to be right. He's the one who fights to do what's right for his child." He turned to James, who sat beside Rebecca, tears streaming down his own face. "James," Derek said, "you did everything I should have done when I panicked. You stayed when I ran. You loved when I failed. You are the father Emma deserved when I didn't know how to be one." The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Everyone knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. Derek looked back at Emma. "My little girl, I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left you at that group home. But James saved you. He gave you everything I wanted to give but didn't know how." Emma tilted her head, her eyes brimming with tears. "But Daddy Derek, does that mean you don't want me anymore?" "I want you more than anything," Derek said quickly, his voice trembling. "I will always want you, but I won't take you away from the family you chose and that chose you back." Standing, Derek turned to Judge Franklin. "Your Honor, I'd like to withdraw my petition for full custody. Instead, I'd like to request something different." The judge frowned. "Go on, Mr. Thompson." "I'd like to request regular visitation rights as her biological father, with James Mitchell maintaining full custody and moving forward with the adoption." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. No one had expected this outcome. Emma jumped from the witness chair and ran to Derek, hugging his legs tightly. "Does this mean I can have two daddies?" Derek looked over her head at James, who had stood and moved closer. "James," Derek said, "I know I don't deserve to ask this after everything I've done, but would it be possible?" James was silent for a long moment, looking at Emma clinging to Derek, then at the man who had abandoned her and was now humbly asking for a second chance. "Derek," James said finally, "Emma taught me that family isn't about perfection, it's about showing up and trying to do better every day." He knelt beside Emma. "Emma, what do you think? Would you like Derek to be part of our family?" Emma looked between the two men she loved in such different ways. "Daddy James, you'll always be my main daddy, the one who saved me and loves me every day." "Always," James said without hesitation. "And Daddy Derek, do you promise never to leave me alone again?" Derek knelt too, looking into her eyes. "Emma, I promise I'll never abandon you again. I may not be your main daddy, that place belongs to James, but I'll always be here when you need me." Emma smiled through her tears. "Then I want two daddies, one who saved me and one who gave me life." Judge Franklin, clearly moved by the scene before him, tapped his gavel gently. "This is one of the most unusual situations I've ever seen, but also one of the most moving, Mr. Mitchell. The adoption of Emma Rose Thompson is officially approved. Mr. Thompson, I grant you supervised visitation rights initially, moving to unsupervised after 6 months, contingent on Emma's continued well-being." Emma squealed with joy and hugged both men at once, but Derek had one more surprise. "Emma," he said, pulling a thick, yellowed envelope from his pocket, "I brought you something that belongs to you." It was stuffed with papers. "These are all the letters your mother wrote for you before she died. She knew she was sick, so she wrote one for every birthday until you turned 18. Emma took the envelope with trembling hands. "Mommy wrote me letters, one for every year. She made me promise to give them to you once you had a stable, happy family." Emma looked at James. "Can I open the first one now?" "Of course, sweetheart." With small but determined fingers, Emma opened the first letter. Her mother's delicate handwriting danced across the page. "My dear Emma, if you're reading this, it means you've found your forever family. I always knew you would find someone special who would love you as much as I do. And if your daddy Derek is there with you, it means he finally learned to be brave. Be happy, my little star." Derek covered his face with his hands, sobbing. "She knew. Your mother always knew I'd someday do the right thing." Emma ran to him and hugged him tightly. "Daddy Derek, Mommy forgave you. I forgive you too." James stepped forward and placed a hand on Derek's shoulder. "Derek, how about dinner together tonight?" As a family, Derek looked at James with raw gratitude. "You'd do that. You'd let me really be part of her life. Emma needs to know where she came from to understand who she is. And she needs to know that people can make mistakes and still be loved." An hour later, they were sitting in a pizzeria, Emma between the two men who were now officially both her dads. She was glowing, holding Sophie in one hand and her mother's letter in the other. "Daddy James," she said, "can I call Derek Daddy Derek forever?" "Of course you can, sweetheart." "And Daddy Derek, will you come see me every week?" Derek looked at James and who nodded. "Every week, little one." "I promise," Emma grinned, biting into her slice of pizza. "Now I'm the luckiest girl in the world. I have two daddies, letters from Mommy and Sophie. And we're the luckiest men in the world," James said, "because we have you." Derek nodded, wiping away another tear. "Emma, thank you for giving me a second chance to be your father. Everyone deserves a second chance. Daddy Derek, Daddy James taught me that. And in that moment, they all knew they had witnessed something truly miraculous. Not just an adoption, but the creation of a unique and special family, built on forgiveness, love, and second chances. 3 years later, it was a sunny May morning in Central Park. Emma, now 11, ran toward the swings with her long blonde hair flying in the wind, followed closely by James and his wife, Sarah, carrying a giant picnic basket, and Derek with his wife, Maria, holding a colorful butterfly-shaped kite. Daddy James. Daddy Derek. Sarah. Maria. Look how high I can go. Emma yelled from the swing, her legs stretched toward the cloudless blue sky. James watched his daughter with a heart overflowing with pride, while Sarah, a pediatrician with brown hair and a warm smile, snapped photos on her phone. At 45, James had discovered that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in moments like these, spring Sundays with his whole family at the park. "Careful so you don't fly away, Emma," called Maria, Derek's wife, an art teacher of Mexican heritage who had won Derek's heart with her contagious laugh and her motherly way with Emma. Derek pushed Emma on the swing, laughing when she shouted, "Higher, higher!" Over the past 3 years, a lot had changed. Derek had married Maria 2 years earlier, and James had married Sarah a year ago. But one thing never changed: the unconditional love for the girl who had brought them all together. "Remember," Emma said suddenly, stopping the swing, "how you two were both too shy to talk to the ladies?" Everyone laughed, remembering those first meetings. Sarah had met James at an Emma's Hope Foundation event where she volunteered on weekends. Emma had literally nudged James toward her, saying, "Daddy, Dr. Sarah loves kids just like you do." Maria, meanwhile, met Derek when Emma insisted he go with her to an art class at school. "Daddy, Derek needs to learn how to paint," Emma had declared, and Derek ended up falling in love not just with art, but with the teacher who taught with so much passion. "Emma was our official matchmaker," Sarah said, sitting on the grass and smoothing her floral dress. "She planned our first date better than any app could. And she still charges commission," Maria joked, her colorful bracelets jingling as she laughed. "Emma said I needed to teach Derek how to make something beautiful with his hands besides fixing cars." Emma jumped off the swing and flopped down in the middle of the group, as she always did. She loved being the center of attention in a family that had grown so perfectly. "Daddy Derek," Emma said, "do you remember when you told Maria you didn't know anything about art but wanted to learn because I asked you to?" Derek blushed, running a hand through Emma's hair. "And do you remember when you told Maria I was a dad in recovery who needed a patient woman?" Everyone burst into laughter. Emma had a unique way of being completely honest that sometimes embarrassed the adults, but always in the sweetest way. "It worked, didn't it?" Emma said, proud of herself. "And Daddy James, remember when you asked Sarah if she wanted to be stepmom to the coolest girl in the world?" Sarah covered her face, laughing. "That was on our 3rd date. I hadn't even decided if I wanted to get serious yet. And you were already planning our wedding. But you said yes," Emma pointed out triumphantly. "And now we have 2 heart moms." That's how Emma referred to Sarah and Maria, her heart moms. She never forgot her biological mother, but her heart had endless room for more love. As they set up the picnic, Emma started talking about her latest school project. "Guys, guess what the topic of my essay was for the state competition?" "No idea," James said, biting into a sandwich Sarah had made. "How 5 adults learned to be a family because of one child," Emma announced proudly. Derek nearly choked on his soda. "You wrote about us again." "Of course. Our family is interesting," Emma laughed. "I wrote about how Daddy James was lonely, Daddy Derek was sad, Sarah worked too much, Maria was tired of men who didn't value art, and I didn't have a family. Then we all found each other and became a perfect family." Maria clapped. "Emma, you're our little philosopher." "And what did you conclude in the essay?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Emma stood up dramatically, as she always did when she wanted full attention. "I concluded that sometimes God brings unusual people together to create incredible families. like when you mix different paint colors and make a new, beautiful one. Derek pulled Maria closer, kissing the top of her head. Our family artist is crafting sophisticated metaphors. And I also concluded, Emma went on, that now I have everything I ever wanted. 2 daddies, 2 heart moms, and Sophie to talk to when you all are being boring. Everyone laughed, and Sarah murmured, "At least she's honest." As the afternoon went on, they walked to the part of the park where a golden plaque had been installed a year earlier. Emma's Hope Foundation had grown even more, especially after Sarah joined as medical director, and Maria created an art therapy program for traumatized children. "Do you remember," Emma said, stopping in front of the plaque, "when I said I wanted a big family?" "I remember," James said. "You said you wanted enough people to fill a dinner table. And now our table is always full." Emma laughed, especially when the aunts and uncles from the foundation come over. It was true. The house had become a gathering place for the entire foundation team, Emma's school friends, and occasionally families they had helped. "And the best part," Emma said, taking everyone's hands at once, "is that our family is still growing." Derek and Maria exchanged meaningful looks, and Sarah smiled mysteriously. "Actually, Emma," Maria said, "we have a surprise for you." Emma froze, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "What kind of surprise?" Derek knelt down to her height. "How about being a big sister?" Emma's jaw dropped. "Maria's pregnant." 2 months, Maria confirmed, glowing. Emma screamed so loudly she startled some birds, then threw herself into Maria's arms. "I'm going to be a sister. A real sister." "And it doesn't stop there," Sarah said, kneeling too. "James and I have news as well." Emma looked between Sarah and James, her eyes even wider. "You too." "Us too," Sarah confirmed. 3 months. Emma went silent for exactly 5 seconds, a record for her, before bursting into pure joy. 2 babies! I'm going to have 2 little siblings." She ran in circles shouting, "Sophie! Sophie, did you hear? We're getting babies." James scooped her up and spun her around. "So, what do you think about being a big sister to 2 babies?" "I think I'm going to be the best big sister in the whole world," Emma declared. "I'm going to teach them everything. How to be brave, how to forgive people, how to make big, happy families." Derek wiped away a tear, looking at his extraordinary family. "Emma, you're already teaching that to everyone." That night, they had dinner at home, all 5 of them around the big table James had bought specifically to fit their growing family. Emma insisted on a toast with grape juice. "A toast," she said, raising her glass. "To Daddy James, who saved me. To Daddy Derek, who came back. To Sarah, who takes care of our hearts. To Maria, who taught us that art is love. And to the babies who are on their way. And to Emma," James said, "who taught us that family is what happens when people choose to love each other." "Forever and ever," Emma finished, as she always did. After dinner, while Emma drew plans for the babies' rooms, the 4 adults sat on the porch, watching Manhattan's lights sparkle. "Can you believe it all started with a little girl crying on the cathedral steps?" Derek asked. "And now look at us," Maria said, stroking her still small belly. 2 families that became one big family. Sarah smiled, interlacing her fingers with James's. "Emma always said love multiplies." I think she was right. James looked through the window at Emma chatting excitedly with Sophie about being a big sister, and his heart overflowed with gratitude. "No," he said softly, "it doesn't multiply. Emma's love created an entire universe. And as the stars shone over New York, 5 hearts beat in harmony, with 2 tiny hearts yet to be born, all bound together by the miracle of a girl who taught the world that family is what we create when we choose to love without limits. And so ends this moving journey of a family that grew beyond anyone's dreams. From 1 lonely little girl to 5 devoted adults and 2 babies on the way. If this story of love, forgiveness, and an expanding family touched your heart, leave your like below. Stories like this remind us there's always room for more love in our lives. Subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories. Our next story is about twins separated at birth who reunite 30 years later. Grab your tissues. In the comments, tell me, what did you think of the family Emma built? Which couple did you find cutest? James and Sarah or Derek and Maria? And who else is excited to hear about the babies? Click the playlist to binge more inspiring stories. We have hundreds of tales about special families waiting for you. Thank you for following Emma's journey from start to finish. May we all find the courage to open our hearts the way she taught us, because sometimes the most perfect family is the one we build with love, patience, and a lot of laughter. See you in the next story.